Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Campus Waterfowl Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Christians. We are sitting here on LSU's campus, Louisiana State University. So we're it's kind of funny that we're back here. We were doing some hunting toward the end of the season to kind of wrap out the duck season with Jackson, if you guys watch those videos on YouTube. But now we're here for a different reason. We're doing some research here with some students, and then we also have a professor here sitting here with us. So to my right here, if you guys are watching the YouTube video here, I have Dr. Kevin Ringelman. We have Starla Phelps, and then also Dekka. I don't know what your last name is.
Ducote.
Ducote. So we also have Dekka here as well. So I think in this podcast, we're going to be talking about kind of what got them into the research side of things, and then what got them inspired to get involved, how they got involved, and then also kind of touch on some of the research that they're working on, and then maybe some future plans as well. But a lot of this stuff, if you guys are interested, will be on YouTube. So if you guys want to see what they're doing in the field throughout this summer, be sure to check out the YouTube video. That'll be coming up probably within a week of this podcast. So be on the lookout for that. But I think let's get into the podcast. Kevin, you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Kevin Ringelman. My full title is I'm the H. Dale Hall Ducks Unlimited Endowed Professor of Wetlands and Waterfowl Conservation at LSU, which is quite a lot. But I'm an associate professor. I've been here for about 8 years, and I am, the waterfowl professor for LSU. So right now I have 6 graduate students. Starla is my new PhD student working on whistling ducks. I have a long backstory, so I'll pass it to Starla.
Hi, my name is Starla Phelps. I'm originally from Tennessee. I did my undergrad at Christian Brothers University and my master's at University of Arkansas at Monticello, and now I'm here.
Awesome. And I'm Dekka Ducote. I'm actually here from Louisiana, and I attended my undergrad here at the LSU Renewable Natural Resource Program, and I've been out of school for about a year working tech jobs and looking to eventually start my own master's program. So this is a great experience watching a new program start up and watch how it all works, because this will be a big help for me in the future.
Mm-hmm. If you guys have been following along, so this is the second season we've been doing the kind of the research tours, kind of what we've called it. But last year we were actually visiting with Dr. Jared Henson up in Memphis, and so yeah, that's kind of how you can kind of see how small of a world the research side is. But then I think I got introduced to Kevin through and Starla through Mike Brazier at Ducks Unlimited, and so it's finally good to kind of come here and experience everything. We actually got a day in the field under the belts already, so we're literally just got back from in the field, and
Yeah.
the Louisiana humidity is definitely
Just a little sweaty.
yeah. So but no, definitely had a great time this morning. I think there was a couple surprises, it seemed like, this morning, so I think we'll touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But let's talk about kind of your backgrounds a little bit more. What kind of got you guys inspired to get involved with waterfowl and just wetland research?
Well, I'll give sort of, I guess, maybe the longer version then.
Yeah.
So my dad worked for the Colorado Division of Wildlife as a wildlife biologist there, and then he was a director of conservation programs for Ducks Unlimited out of their Great Plains office in Bismarck. And so I've always sort of been in the research side of the waterfowl world, and getting involved here at LSU has taught me a little bit about the fundraising side as well. So I've always been sort of engaged with ducks, and both my mom and dad were big hunters and things like that. For undergrad, I went to upstate New York to Cornell University, where I did research on passerines and things like that. And then I went straight from undergrad to a PhD program, which I would not recommend, so do it more like Dekka is doing it, to UC Davis, where I worked with John Eady on some ground nesting waterfowl in the Sassoon Marsh of California. And then I went back across the country on a fairly harrowing drive to the University of Delaware, where I worked on black duck movement ecology for about a year, and then I started at LSU about 8 years ago. So it's been kind of a wild ride. So my current research program is anywhere from South Louisiana, where Alex and maybe a little bit Starla's working, all the way up to Saskatchewan. So sort of span multiple flyways and all across the continent, which is pretty fun, but keeps me traveling.
Yeah, so I started out actually as pre-med. That was the path that I was going. So my undergrad is actually in biology with a minor in chemistry. And essentially I wanted to be a physical therapist. And one day, Dr. Jared Henson actually, he came up to me. I was in his anatomy and physiology class, and he's like, hey, I'm running a SBOC study this summer, and I need students to help. Like, would you be interested? And I was like, sure, why not? Didn't think anything of it, and then just instantly fell in love with it. And I didn't know anything about ducks. I didn't even know what a whistling duck was. I didn't even know there were different types of ducks. I just knew a duck was a duck. Like, that's all I knew. And so I'm more new to this field than, like, some people, I would say, just because, you know, for the first 3 years of my undergrad, it was all medical stuff. And then senior year, I decided, like, to do more, like, wildlife classes that we did have, which wasn't many. And then I just went straight into my master's to do actual, like, my degree is in, like, forestry, but even then still mainly, like, wetland classes and stuff like that. But, you know, I didn't have the typical route that most people have to get in this field. I didn't grow up with hunting or anything like that. So I just kind of stumbled into this field and fell in love.
Yeah, and I guess I'm the younger of the group, so I don't have as much backstory. So I'll go back a little further. I growing up, like, by the time I was like 4, I was the kid at T-ball in the outfield collecting bugs instead of playing the game. And I always had an interest in the outdoors. And my family, they did some hunting, but it wasn't a very big thing in my life. I kind of decided this on my own. And then by the time I was a 7 or 8, I learned of the word wildlife biologist. And from that point on, I knew that I think this is the career I want to go to, which is impressive for an 8-year-old.
Do you remember how you stumbled across that kind of career or title?
I believe it was, I mean, there's always things like Steve Irwin and Jeff Corwin, and there's television that shows you the insides of that, much like this program does, where it kind of opens the curtain and shows you what wildlife biologists do, and seeing those kind of things. And then I have some relatives that ended up being wildlife biologists. There currently still are for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. But being exposed to that, I realized very early on that this was what I wanted to do. And by the time I got to my senior year of high school, I got in contact with my relatives that were with the department. I'm like, how do I get into this field? And they pointed me to LSU at the Renewable Natural Resource Department, which is where they all went. And senior year of high school, it was the only college I applied to. I got my grades, and I came here in the fall. And lucky enough, I was able to take a lot of courses with Dr. Ringelman, and I think it was his waterfowl biology course that finally sealed the deal, and his first hunter program as well. I had never gone on a waterfowl hunt before. I knew nothing about duck hunting, and I ended up going to Oak Grove as my first hunt, which is
Pretty okay.
It's a pretty good place to go. I limited out on my teal, and from that point on, I knew that I definitely want to work with birds, whether that be upland birds or waterfowl, but I knew that this was definitely the career for me.
Yeah, and I think these dual perspectives here, I think, are really important, especially for anyone listening to this podcast and, you know, thinking about career paths, whether they're in middle school or high school, that this is a job that you can do.
Yeah.
Is to be outside, either working and actively managing habitats and water levels and agricultural things, or forestry, or working directly with the birds and wildlife themselves. And so, you know, Starla has sort of a more non-traditional background where, you know, Dekka's coming in with that interest pre-sealed. But,
Yeah.
you know, there are programs like this that exist around the country. And one of the strengths at LSU is we really try hard to get our students into the field actively hands-on. So beyond just the classroom and learning from pictures of birds, we're actually going out and catching snakes and banding ducks and all of that. So it's a lot of work as a professor, but it's pretty rewarding to see.
Yeah.
You know.
And since graduating, I've gone on and worked plenty of tech jobs that have been introduced to me specifically from this program. I've done songbird surveys for the U.S. Forest Service in conjunction with LSU. I've tracked turkeys. I'm now catching ducks and banding and geolocating and pit tagging and all the ings. But this program definitely, like, the people you meet and the exposure that you get, like, I definitely wouldn't be this far along without it.
Kevin, you mentioned kind of like you go in the field a lot with your students. What level classes are you bringing out in the field with you?
So in this program, we get students in the field by their sophomore year,
Really?
but
Okay.
most of the classes that I teach that are field oriented are for juniors and seniors.
Okay.
But there's a lot. We're electroshocking fish and flying drones and all sorts of things. So it's pretty great. I know when we were in the field today, you wanted me to talk a little bit about graduate education as well. So yeah, one of the things that even as incoming freshmen, a lot of our students don't realize is that if you want to have a well-paying career in wildlife, something beyond sort of the entry-level jobs, like it really is beneficial to get an advanced degree, whether it's a master's degree like Starla got from Arkansas Monticello, or going on to a PhD to have a research job in USGS or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And in the wildlife field, these are paid graduate positions. So, Starla receives an annual stipend. It's not a lot, but it's enough to live on.
Yes.
And all of her tuition is waived and things like that. And so, my job is I get research grants to pay graduate students for their time and effort to get that advanced degree. So, for any of those listeners out there thinking that the graduate school is financially beyond you or anything like that, it's like, the professors are paying for you to go to school to get your advanced degree. And when I'm looking for graduate students, what Dekka is doing right now and getting this experience in all these various techniques and different geographies is really important because, if I've got a research project, I can't be in the field with my students every day. I'm lucky if I get out for, a few days a year, really.
Yeah.
And so, Starla worked with whistling ducks in Memphis, and so I don't need to teach her about whistling ducks or how to handle them. She's banded a ton of ducks with Doug in Monticello, and so she was ready to just hit the ground running. And so a lot of times, those practical hands-on field skills are really important for getting a spot in a graduate program. But, I have other students who are doing some machine learning, visual algorithm stuff with drone footage. And there, Zach's experience in remote sensing and in coding, in Python and things like that has been super beneficial too. So it's really about matching a student to a particular project and developing those skill sets both in your undergrad and beyond that to be competitive.
I would say, so the coding is pretty intimidating. I think the word coding intimidates a lot of people, myself included. Do a lot of your students coming in know coding, or are they learning coding kind of on the job?
It's variable. Most of them, for most of the positions that I'm hiring, I want them to be safe and competent in the field because I can't be there with them, but I can be there with them in the lab, learning statistics and coding and things like that. So, realistically, unless you're a hardcore stats person, you're really only going to learn statistics when you have to, when you have your own data that you then have to do something with. And then you can Google it, or I guess ChatGPT it now, and figure out how to do it. So
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
But in my master's, that was tackling R and learning how to code was one of the funnest things, but one of the hardest things. But Google was my best friend. I could literally you have to figure out how to type the question just right, but you will find the answer.
And in this undergrad, I got some exposure to coding, light usage of R. We did it in waterfowl biology as well. But going forward, it's definitely something that I personally want to do because I think it'll set myself ahead of a lot of people when I start that application period. And actually, just a couple days ago, I found out that Stanford, they have a free online intro to coding course that you can take on your own time during the semester. And it's something that I plan on doing very soon because I think it'll be helpful because I know I'm going to have to do stats at some point and might as well get it done now.
Yeah, and different programs around the country are variable. So I know University of Minnesota, their wildlife or maybe their zoology students, I forget what they call them, Todd Arnold teaches a really sort of code-intensive class in population ecology, and that's just not one of the strengths of this program. So it's uneven across the country, I would say. But everyone can learn it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess in the pockets, and Dekka, you mentioned when you start applying for these kind of positions or these opportunities, Kevin and I were kind of talking about too this morning about what maybe his perspective, what does he look for in applicants? And I think as listeners and viewers, I think that might help if Kevin could share a little bit, maybe things that he looks for, or even what's a good like what are some resources students could use to at least get, I guess, their foot in the door early on to kind of get into the field? Because I think a lot of stuff professors might look for is field work, but it might be kind of tough getting that first foot in the door.
Yeah, so it starts in your undergrad. So there's two important things you need to do in undergrad. One is get decent grades, because you can't go back and change those. You can always get more experience or varied experience, but you can't change your grades. And some programs have like a hard floor where, like, if you don't have a 3.0, like, you're just not eligible for their programs. So grades do matter.
Yeah.
And then it's actually talking to your professors, because they're the ones who are going to get you your first field jobs. It's there's a stack of applications for some DU interns in South Dakota or whatever, but it says LSU on it, and so then I get phone calls regardless of whether you list me as a reference or not, because they know me. And then it's just a couple words, and then that's your job. So those are certainly the easiest ways to get your foot in the door is through existing connections. But if you're at Starla University, it requires maybe a little bit more work if you don't have like a huge wildlife program that you can rely on faculty. Your state agencies often have volunteer positions for banding and things like that. There's migratory bird programs in every state. Local Audubon societies, things like that, offer pasturing banding workshops. So getting first field jobs, and then it's, things that I'm looking for in a student is, it would be unusual if I hired you for a graduate position and I'd never heard your name. That would be really unusual. You were talking about how small the waterfowl research
Very
world
small.
is.
Like, this is only my, I think, 5th or 6th trip, and it's like the amount of times, like, I've mentioned like past trips I've been on, or like ones I plan on going on. It's like, Kevin, he knows so-and-so and so-and-so. Starla knows so-and-so and so. So it's like, it's crazy. Right. So it's really building those connections, with successive field jobs. And they're all advertised on like the Texas A&M Wildlife Jobs Board. So I forget what the actual website is, but if you Google that, you'll find it. And there's some other waterfowl-specific resources and things like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I think a big thing for me, at least, like with my non-traditional background, is I showed that I had passion for this field and that I really wanted to do the work and I really wanted to learn. Like, I knew I acknowledged that I was like a little bit more behind, since I don't have the traditional like background and knowledge that some other people do from the classes they took. But I just like showed that I had the drive, and passion, and that's what got my foot into the door. And also just like having a mentor. That's like the biggest thing for me, at least. Like, Dr. Jared Henson was like the most helpful person, and he like made sure I knew everything, not like everything about this field, but like knew the details about this field, and was like made sure this is what I wanted to do. Like, he really took the time. And then he, at the North American Duck Symposium, he made sure I got to go to that and present my undergrad research, and that's how my name really got out into this field, and how I got to meet a lot of people and make those connections. And I made another thing too is, when you make these connections, follow up with the connections, because if you don't follow up, they're not going to remember your name as well.
Yep, I remember when Starla was one of the only undergrads to present her research at that duck symposium. I think it was this one, right? Ducks 8. And that was, she's got a pretty recognizable name, and her rolling up to get an award for her undergrad research certainly stood out in the minds of a lot of faculty who are watching. That cool. she's gonna be something. So.
Yeah, thank you.
And now she's here. Gonna be Dr. Phelps one day. So.
Awesome. Yeah, you'll be looking back on this video and be like, man, look where I started.
Yeah, literally where I'm starting. I haven't even technically started the PhD yet.
Right. But that's one of the most, it's not one of, it's clearly the most rewarding thing about having, a university job, is following these undergrads as they sort of figure out what they want to do with their lives. And then usually if they take my waterfowl class, I convince them that ducks are what they want to do with their lives. And then seeing them, succeed in various, jobs or graduate positions. I think I've got something like a dozen former students or techs or whatever who work for Ducks Unlimited now. And they're in grad programs anywhere from California to Maryland to Delaware to Canada and everywhere in between. So,
and kind of, I just want to focus on students maybe that are planning, like right now it's kind of the off-season summer. Students in high school are thinking about where they're going to college. Like, thinking of myself when I was in high school, like, I was super eager. Like, I couldn't wait to get to college. Like, open, like meet people, find opportunities and things like that. I was kind of ready. If there's students out there right now that are kind of have that same edge, like where would you send them to kind of get started at least? Do you think, is it the websites of these state agencies would be the best place to kind of start reaching out to people, or?
Yeah, it could be. You can always access your local chapter of Ducks Unlimited, right? Because they'll have connections to things related to the science realm as well. But then, yeah, you're as a taxpayer of your state, you are more than entitled to call up your state waterfowl biologists and say hi, and they'll be happy that you're not a mad duck hunter this time, and you're actually were interested in research stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I think those are good resources. Local Audubon societies, birding clubs, all of that can sort of get you sort of feeling out what is in your local area.
Yeah, or just like any colleges that are on your list that you're wanting to go out, reach out to their department, and like once you reach out, they can guide you in the right direction. They can tell you about the program. They can tell you about the different things that they do, what's the strong suit of the program, what's not, and like knowing what you're getting into as well is a big thing, because they can also be like, you could ask, is there any volunteer opportunities so I can experience this before I want to come here? And who knows, there might be a summer project like ours that lead professor can be like, sure, we've taken out multiple students that are volunteers this summer to go show them the field and show them what this is all about. So like, don't be afraid to ask for those volunteer opportunities, because they're big.
Your state university has a forestry program that probably has a wildlife component in it. Yeah. Almost certainly.
Yeah, and it's important to get those opportunities like Dekka was saying, because, for me personally, like if I wouldn't have done all the internships that I did in undergrad, I wouldn't have known that the health science field was not for me. I would have continued in that realm and then been potentially stuck there. So like I did those, and then I did the research with Henson and just was like, oh, okay. So like you can really discover what you want to do through the actual internships versus just sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, and as we tell our students, finding out what you don't want to do is just as important, honestly.
Yeah.
There's some pretty big divides. Do you like plants or animals? Do you like things that swim in water, things that are on land, things that fly, or things that walk? Things you can shoot, things you can't shoot, right? These are all important distinctions that sort of progressively narrow you into a particular career path.
Yeah, I took a job one time, like trapping hogs in the summer heat of Louisiana for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and I was like, I think I'm good on this side of it.
Well, perfect. I think that's a good spot to kind of cut and kind of pivot to talk about more of the research stuff. The reason I want to take that time to talk about that is because I do get messages and people reaching out of just different opportunities and just students wanting to get involved, and they just don't really know where to go. And so hearing it from students that are going through it, and then Dr. Ringelman as well, hopefully that helps you guys, and you can find someone in your area or somewhere that you might be going to college to kind of get your foot in the door early. So hopefully that helps. But let's start talking about the research. So Dr. Ringelman, do you want to kind of talk about kind of what your programs all entail and all the projects you oversee?
Yeah, sure. So I'll focus right now on Starla's project. We can talk about the other ones if we have time. But Starla's project emerged from this ongoing wood duck recruitment study. That's a partnership among a half dozen southeastern states to basically estimate whether box populations are self-sustaining of wood ducks or whether they're a waste of time. So in Louisiana, we have whistling ducks that also use these wood duck boxes, and so there's an obvious sort of management tension about whether whistling ducks are competing with wood ducks for these boxes. They are nest parasites, so whistling ducks will lay eggs in wood duck nests, which is potentially bad. If there's too many eggs, the nests won't hatch. And so there's this tension of how wood ducks and whistling ducks are coexisting. And this is particularly relevant because whistling ducks have been expanding their range. So they're, historically speaking, like in the 70s and 80s, they were, along the Texas coast and maybe a little bit into Louisiana, but the bulk of their range was through Mexico well into South America. And it's only been since the mid-2000s that we've seen this massive influx of whistling ducks to places as far north as Memphis, and there's been wandering individuals seen in Canada. So this is a rapidly expanding species. We know almost nothing about it, and they're potentially competing with native wood ducks, which we do care about and are an important bird in the bag for tons of hunters in southern states. And so I have another PhD student, Dylan Bakener, who's tackling sort of the wood duck angle, but we really needed someone to focus specifically on whistling ducks because we just don't know a lot about them. And so that was specifically why I hired Starla to come in and do a PhD on whistling ducks. And so we're interested in things about, how many eggs they lay and how many ducklings they hatch and sort of what it looks like their populations are doing. But we're also interested in things like return rates. So the ducklings that we mark, when they come back as adults, do they come back at what frequency, and are they breeding? Things about rates of parasitism. And then the cool piece of technology that Starla is deploying this field season and next field season are called geolocators. And you'll see these in the field in the YouTube videos, but they're light sensors attached to a clock. And basically they use the day length to estimate latitude. And then they use the midpoint between dawn and dusk to estimate longitude. And so then you can actually get an approximate spot on the globe for that bird. It's accurate to a few hundred kilometers, but sufficient to know whether your whistling duck has gone to Texas or Costa Rica. These light logging devices need to be recovered. And so Starla's study is going to take place over multiple years. So as those birds that we put geolocators on, as they come back to breed again, take the geolocator off and see where they went. And we can also detect things like nesting attempts from these light loggers and things like that. So that's sort of how this project came to be. And now Starla is sort of grinding in the field and trying to get the details done.
Mm-hmm.
And how big? So you have a team as well under you, Starla.
Yes.
So how big is your team?
So we have me and then 3 other techs, Dekka included. So Dekka and I run Sherburne, and we have 2 other techs, Emily and Ben, and both of them, they run the Woodworth sites. So essentially what we're doing is we're just going out and checking nest boxes. Like that's kind of like the broad overview. So at Sherburne Wildlife Management Area, we have, how many nest boxes do you think we have, Dekka, off the top of your head? I can't.
Oh, we have
There's like
probably near 200.
Yeah, there's quite a few boxes. So what we do is we do weekly checks on them, and essentially what we do is like, when you check a box, there'll be eggs in it, and then we number each egg so that they have their own number, and then that way we can keep track of, whether if they're depredated, when they hatch, etc., like all of these things. And then we also like take the adult bird and we tag them, we put a band on them, we pit tag them, and take different measurements, draw blood. There's a lot of different things that we do in the field. But essentially the whole idea is to figure out like how many ducklings that these birds are having. And so we tag the adults and the ducklings, and then they go on from there. So, but what we're kind of doing this week is just, we're kind of going out trying to catch, and check on the whistling duck nest specifically. Because our wood duck season is kind of, breeding season has kind of come to like an end for the most part. We still have a couple of nests left, but for the most part they're over. So right now it's whistling duck time. And so
Yeah, maybe you just give the listeners a sense of like what types of numbers we're seeing for nests and how many hatch and how many fail and what's the cause of failure and things like that.
Yeah, so essentially I'm going to focus mainly on Sherburne just because, we're still entering data and stuff for Woodworth, and we're honestly still entering data for Sherburne as well. But so just kind of like a few rough estimates that we have. So all over Sherburne, we've had roughly 150 nests this season, and that's with one of our sites, or actually 2 of our sites, being kind of shut down temporarily because of boat issues. So we probably would have more nests, but, that's just kind of something that we ran into this season. We've banded roughly over 100 adults, about 81 wood ducks, 16 black-bellied whistling ducks, and 5 hooded mergansers. So those are the cavity nesters that we catch in the nest boxes. And then, turn my book a little bit. So far we've had, and this is just, so those were across all of Sherburne. Okay. So far at just the North and South Farm units, we've had 31 successful wood duck nests, 2 black-bellied whistling ducks, and 4 hooded mergansers. And then we've had 7 wood ducks that have been non-successful and 6 black-bellied whistling ducks that have been non-successful. And when I say non-successful, essentially the nest can fail due to multiple reasons. One of the reasons is depredation from like snakes or woodpeckers. At North and South Farm, we have a lot of issues with snakes. But like at our boat sites, which is we call Section 120, those sites we have a lot of issues with woodpeckers actually depredating our eggs. And so those are kind of like what we kind of face with that. But also sometimes the ducks will just abandon the nest. And so we have like different codes that we use essentially. So some of them are just like, it's partially depredated, abandoned, just abandoned, or total depredation and abandoned. So those are kind of the reasons why the nest may fail. And also like other reasons why, if they're, brood parasitism becomes too heavy, then essentially the whichever species is incubating at that time can just leave. That's one of the issues that we're looking at to see, like with like species like, whenever whistling ducks parasitize whistling ducks or wood ducks parasitizing whistling ducks and vice versa, that's the things that we're kind of looking at.
Yeah, and this woodpecker predation is really interesting. I mean, you wouldn't think of red-bellied woodpeckers as being fierce predators of duck nests, but in fact, they are the number one predator at our sites. And so they'll enter a box and basically peck an egg open and then eat on it and then leave and then come back and eat on it some more. And then when the incubating hen comes back, she will notice the damaged egg and actually remove that. And then the woodpecker will come and peck a different egg and sort of starts all over again. And one of the most interesting dynamics from my perspective is, we came into this study thinking about wood ducks and whistling ducks, and whistling ducks are going to parasitize wood duck nests, and there's going to be too many eggs, and the wood ducks will abandon, like Starla was talking about. But in fact, that's not happening. And one of the reasons we think that is because whistling ducks are adding eggs to those nests, but woodpeckers are removing them effectively. They're killing them. And so, you could imagine if you had an area where there was only woodpeckers, eventually the woodpeckers would kill the whole clutch of eggs, eat all the eggs eventually. And if you had a site where you had only whistling ducks and no woodpeckers, you might get too many eggs, and you have an unsuccessful nest as well. But if you've got both whistling ducks and woodpeckers, it's kind of like one is adding and the other one is taking away, and you kind of like hatch out like a pretty okay clutch at the end of it all. So some really unexpected dynamics from the interplay of these three species. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And you see all combinations of things down here. We had at least one nest with all three species in it this year, right?
There was one what we call the trifecta nest, which is like you got a merganser egg, you got a whistling duck egg, and you got a wood duck egg. We so far over the course of this project, like with Dylan's time here, and then now going into Starla, we have yet to have one of those nests hatch out all three ducklings at once. The closest we get is we'll get two.
Yeah, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Is it pretty easy to identify like the different eggs? We were talking about it a little bit today, but like what about how like a wood merganser compares?
Yeah, so merganser eggs are typically like a little bigger, and they're like, to me, they're a little bit more round, and they're like white as well.
They're a cue ball.
Yeah, a cue ball essentially. That's a good way to put it. And then like wood duck eggs are, like I said, a little bit smaller than hood or mergansers, and like typically they're not as rounded. And sometimes they have like this little tan color. It's not necessarily like the best, way to tell that is a wood duck egg, but in comparison to the other two, they are usually more like tan and not as like bright white. And then with the whistling duck egg, one thing that we were talking about earlier in the YouTube video is that when you candle a whistling duck egg, it's speckled. And like the outside of it is like almost like you can run your finger over it, and it's not like a super smooth surface. It's kind of like got like a little roughness to it.
Yeah, and the span of nest initiation dates is different for the three species as well. So hood and mergansers will be on the early end, early in the season. Then you'll get wood ducks coming in, and then right around the time when any failed wood duck nesters are re-nesting, that's when whistling ducks are laying eggs parasitically in wood duck nests. And then after sort of that period is done, then whistling ducks will start laying their own nests and incubating their own nests. So it's kind of a cool mixed strategy. So right now we are on whistling duck incubation, and we are in mid-June.
Yes, and they also parasitize each other pretty heavily. We just had a nest last week, actually. The total egg count for the box made it to 48 eggs, and we hatched out 37 ducklings.
which is incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy successful.
Yeah. Was a bunch of cute little babies in a bucket.
Yeah,
when we were going
and
through.
hatching out these mixed broods of wood ducks and whistling ducks is not uncommon. In fact, with the numbers, including Dylan's data, it's basically 1/3 of the whistling duck ducklings that hatch come from wood duck nests, from parasitizing those nests. So a major part of their productivity is from parasitism, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
And then these mixed broods, or these mixed clutches of eggs, what's really unusual is we don't ever really see mixed broods swimming on the water. So, a whistling duck, mom and dad will hatch out 3 wood ducks, but you don't see them with the whistling duck brood. And so we don't know what happens or where they go. Like, we don't know if the whistling ducks are like killing the wood duck ducklings. We don't think that's totally true, because we had wood duck ducklings hatched by whistling ducks that we've caught in boxes in previous years, right? So it's probably not that. Are they reassorting where the wood ducks will realize that they would prefer to be with other wood ducks, and they sort of split off and find like a foster mom? Like, it's just one of those great unknowns. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Just another project you got to start.
Yep.
Yeah.
How many, like, when you guys are out there, like, how many times in a day do you think about just like things you could research, or like things you could do differently to your current project?
Oh, it's like every time we go out, in between going from one box to the next, there's always another thought of like, oh, we could do this differently. Oh, I wonder what's going on with that. Like,
Yeah, we're always asking each other questions. We're like, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that?
yeah,
Like, there's always like questions just bouncing back and forth between us, and we're just like, I don't know. And
Yeah,
then we kind of jot them down sometimes. And we're like, oh, that's a good one.
yeah, like the most recent one that we've been trying to figure out is right now we're in a little bit of a drought. There's not a lot of water around, and we've had quite a few nests that like whistling ducks just kind of abandoned. And we're like, does this correlate? Why would that even work? What about water would even make that happen? Like, it could be something totally unrelated, but like there's always so many unknowns when you're out in the field that you're just constantly asking questions. And that's why like we need more technicians and more people doing research, because like there's just too many questions
Like,
to
and
answer.
the bands like turning colors,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
and then also like that was a big thing that we like saw the other day, and we're like, that band used to be like a silvery color, and now it's orange.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. There's not enough hours in the day to answer all the questions you want to answer.
That's kind of where you come in, trying to get these grants, right? Is that kind of?
Yeah. And I'm at a point now. So I currently have 6 graduate students, 2 PhD students, 4 master's students, and an undergrad researcher, which is arguably beyond my capacity to efficiently handle. So a couple of them are graduating this fall, so we'll clear out some space. But yeah, it's just like finding money hasn't been super difficult. Our state agency has been super supportive, and we've got some federal money, and Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl have all contributed to research. It's like finding, it's a bandwidth issue. There's only so many waterfowl faculty in North America, and there's loads of questions. And so, one of the, I operate on a couple sort of national and international organizing committees that think about sort of the waterfowl profession writ large. And one of the things we're concerned about is, a lot of waterfowl faculty are approaching retirement age. And so it's this idea of like, who's going to mind the marsh? Like, who's going to be here to train the next generation of waterfowl, both scientists and managers? And so that's something that we're starting to grapple with as a profession, because you think about all of the other pressing environmental needs that are out there, and ducks and geese are doing pretty well compared to other birds, let alone things like herps or something like that.
Yeah.
And so as a wildlife department, like, what is their motivation to replace a retiring faculty member with someone who does waterfowl research, as opposed to some of these other pressing environmental needs? And so, lots of things to think about that are operating, at scales above master students and technicians. But
But I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, because I think I've seen it. Was it this last year where I can't remember what survey? It was like a national survey looking at different like types of habitats and like the birds and stuff. Was it Wetlands the only one that had like increasing numbers?
Oh yeah, I mean, so the famous 3 billion birds report that North America's lost like literally 3 billion birds since the 1970s, and all taxonomic groups are in decline except for waterfowl and
Yeah.
wetland dependent species, which are up, and that's largely on the backs of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan and the joint ventures and associated things like that. So I mean, waterfowl are in great shape, and it's a legacy effect going back through the 1980s.
Do you think that then other organizations seeing those other I guess ecosystems, or I don't know how you would describe them, but do you think they would try to template kind of what?
And they have. So,
What we're doing?
When the North American Waterfowl Management Plan was released in 1986, that's become sort of like the model strategic conservation document that has been, not copied, but imitated by Partners in Flight and by shorebird conservation and seabird conservation and all these other consortiums that are trying to conserve, their favorite charismatic species. But it's really, I feel pretty comfortable in this job because ducks are, at least in my lifetime, still going to be pretty popular among North American hunters. And I think that their passion for the resource will continue to support, state agencies and their priorities, and NGOs like DU and Delta and Cal Waterfowl that will then funnel money into research and management for the foreseeable future.
How do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, it's definitely like waterfowl's here to stay. There's definitely a lot of other programs and other animals and species that don't have the backing, and it's just because like people love ducks. I mean, whether you're in a resident and you're looking at your back pond and you like to see them, or you're a fellow duck hunter and you go out and you chase these species all season long. It's hard for a lot of other species to have that kind of backing because a lot of these ones that are struggling are simply not things that the model allows to hunt, where it's your passerines or other avian species like that.
And also I feel like too, like, ducks are like researchers and like programs like DU and stuff. They're really good at like making people know about ducks. Like, like me, I didn't really know anything about birds at all, but I knew what a duck was. I didn't know what a passerine meant at all. Like, I couldn't tell you the difference between like a sparrow and a something else, like I just, so like ducks are just like this image that you can like see. So I do agree that ducks are going to be around to stay. And also they're super cute. Like, you've seen a duckling. Ducklings are adorable.
Yeah.
People love ducklings.
Yeah, we're going to see some ducklings tomorrow in the field.
Yes.
It's pretty much a guarantee.
Yep.
From what we saw today. Well, I wanted to put in, we talked about everyone knows what a duck is, but I think it's efforts like this that reach a broader constituency that is something that the waterfowl profession has been wanting to do more effectively for at least since the 2012 update of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, is engage a broader constituency. And so, I'm sure we're reaching a ton of duck hunters on this podcast and with a YouTube video, but engaging.
It's the general public that needs to know more about it.
Yeah.
And we had this conversation the other day at dinner, like outreach in this field is such an important aspect of it. Like, if people don't know what we go out there and do every day or understand it, it's hard for them to have a connection or a want to back that, whether it's through policy or a donation or simply just sharing it as an interest. Like, if you don't have outreach and people don't understand what you do, it's hard to move forward in that field.
Yeah, so these YouTube videos and podcasts and things like that sort of spread their message more broadly, and doing this summer series that moves campus waterfowl beyond hunting on college campuses to highlight some of these student research projects and sort of show certainly the hunting constituency sort of what goes into managing these populations and making sure that things are being done sustainably and we're providing for the resource in perpetuity, I think is super cool.
Yeah, and I think there's a big need to break down the barrier between like science and then the public, because I think like a lot of times like we try to reach the public, but sometimes we're too we're almost like use too big of words or something. It's like it's hard to break down the models that we use and use it in layman's terms, like because sometimes like I'll get really excited about my project and I'll just like start spewing off stuff and people are like, slow down, take a step back, re-explain what you mean by that. And so sometimes like we just as scientists forget, we get so excited about it that we just kind of like go, and we're just like, and we got to re-figure out how to engage the public in the science too.
Yeah, and like we're always in the field, so we're like these reclusive scientists that are like, we don't want to interact with you. We want to go look at the ducks, and it's like,
Right.
if you do that forever, it's not gonna work out. You have to have a conversation at some point.
Yep. No, I think content like this definitely helps bridge like communities together. Definitely, whether if it's like the hunting community, the science community, and then to just the general public, it kind of brings everyone kind of together, and people can see eye to eye of like kind of why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think with Campus Waterfowl for the longest time, just highlighting like just the hunting side of things. With us starting the research tour, I think a lot of students are learning a lot about the ducks that they're going after in the fall time. And when they shoot that mallard, that great looking mallard in the late January, they can bring it back to the blind and actually talk about a little bit more about it than just calling it a greenhead or something.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and when we get like when we're tagging these ducklings, I'll see on Facebook, like on Band Hunters or whatever, someone will post a picture of a wood duck with a web tag, and it's got LA 315, which is one of our birds, and so I'm happy to I'll message the guy, and we'll trade a few messages back and forth, and I'll say, well, that's a duckling that hatched from Sherburne North Farm, from a clutch of 13. It was marked as a day one bird, and she traveled that 400 miles up to Arkansas and until you shot her. So thanks for reporting your band. And they're like, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know that people were doing research on these things. So.
And that's something he'll tell that story over and over again.
Oh yeah.
About the back, kind of the backstory behind the band.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think that's like one thing that's really cool about like the research aspect and like the different programs and stuff is like, like I love bringing volunteers out into the field and like showing them like, like hunters see a band and like, oh, it's a band, and they get so excited about it, but like there's so much that goes into that band that people don't necessarily know about, because like Dekka said, we're kind of just sometimes a little reclusive with it,
Yeah.
So I think it's important to show like you just said, like the backstory of the band too.
What are some? So we've been looking at wood ducks and black belly whistling ducks this week. What are some interesting things that maybe duck hunters could talk about black belly whistling ducks in the duck blind to their peers? What's something that like a fun fact or something that they could talk about?
My favorite thing is their name is like Dendrocygna autumnalis, and Dendrocygna means tree swan. That's like my coolest fact that I have.
Yeah, and they're evolutionarily more closely related to swans than they are to other ducks, and they share a lot of characteristics with swans. So males and females look alike. We call that sexually monomorphic. Both sexes incubate, which is hyper weird. The young stay with mom and dad after they fledge, which is really unusual. And so if you're in the blind and you're lucky enough to have a shot at whistling ducks, like they will be in a family group, right? And they will continue to circle after you shoot one or two of them.
Yeah, I sat this year and I saw a big family group fly over us. They were nowhere near coming down into the spread, but they were just heading somewhere. They had direction. But
Yeah. And so these birds will leave and go somewhere, after the breeding season. We don't know where. That's why Starla's doing her project. But when they come back in March, it looks like they're still in family groups. And so we have blood from all of the birds that we've caught. And so we should be able to do genetic analyses to get at some of these questions. But they're just an incredibly unique species in North America. And should you be lucky enough to shoot one, they taste pretty good too.
yeah, so I've heard.
I think I've heard that as well. So I don't think. No, I haven't had one yet. So.
Yeah, they're eating a lot of agricultural grains, rice, and stuff like that, and so they taste like a really good pintail.
Yeah.
Very cool. I think you guys ready to wrap up?
Yeah.
I think that's a good spot to
Yeah.
kind of wrap things up. Well, before we wrap things up, I always ask everyone, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone kind of listening to this podcast?
I mean, be proactive if this is a field that you're really considering. Don't just let opportunities go by the wayside. You need to be the one that reaches out, because if you don't do that and you don't show that initiative, like it's not going to stand out. You have to be the one that pursues this.
Yeah. My advice is to just have fun. Like, it's a job like any other, but what sets this apart from other jobs is just like, at least for me, is just how enjoyable it is. Like, I'm passionate about it. I love it. Like, it gets hot in Louisiana, but I want to be out there in the heat to interact with these ducks and ducklings. And so just have fun with it. Go explore, take different tech jobs, see the world. You have all these different opportunities at your hands. Just go for it. You never know where you're going to end up. Life is not necessarily what you expect it all the time to be. So just go.
Yeah, I think I'll combine both of those. And I think it is really important to be proactive, and especially in building connections with people who can help get you things. So you can talk to your professors. It's fine. We are, in fact, people, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important for college students. And then being flexible, like Starla was saying, taking advantage of opportunities. So, yeah, you may want to have a career sort of by your family or wherever you grew up or whatever, but that doesn't mean that you can't take a tech job in the Carolinas or in California or in the high Arctic, and sort of explore those different things. Just be open to new experiences and try to be flexible in what you can do.
All right. Perfect. Well, I can't thank you guys enough for letting me come down for a couple days, follow you guys with the camera in the field. So
Yeah,
guys
absolutely.
you guys have been doing great. I think, the YouTube video will turn out awesome. Look forward to going back to editing that, but I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Hopefully,
Yes.
Hopefully
Some
we have
ducklings.
we got some ducklings.
And especially thank you, because for having this program and for coming out here and doing all this. Like you didn't have to drive across the country to come out and see us, but it means a lot. It means a lot, especially for like outreach for the program.
Yeah, for sure.
No problem. I'd do it again in a heartbeat.
Yeah, we're incredibly grateful because this is what science needs.
That's right. Well, I hope you guys were able to learn a little bit, be inspired a little bit. I hope we do have a few more trips planned for this off season before the hunting season starts. So be on the lookout for that. But no, can't thank this crew enough. And thank you guys again for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.